Yeah.
Well, you know, I have a message to give, and I feel like I represent something that a younger person might look at me and say, I believe everything he said. I don't want to be like Too Short. I don't want to be that negative thing with Too Short. And I personally feel like I have a message that I've been preaching the same message. And it's like, you do realize that I've never been a pimp. You do realize that I don't walk off stage and slap girls and call them out their name and then expect them to be with me for that behavior. And you know, the message is that I mean, it's just you gotta really like, if that's what you want to be like Too Short, you want to be like a player with some money, you might want to go to school and learn to be a gentleman. And if you look at the long term of cats my age, and we talk about what we did after high school, you know, all the guys who were supposed to be like the college nerds or whatever, they run around in Oakland right now, Beamers and Benzes, and driving up to their house. And you know, the cats who was hardcore in the streets, they, you know, on cologne or something right now. So that's the reality.
Amen. My name is Darika Blackman, and I am blessed to be a part of this event this evening. I want to give my thanks to 100 Black Men, A Safe Place, Representative Keith Carson, and you for coming out this evening to make sure that we have a deeper conversation about what is going on in our community and what is going on in the messages in our media. So what you just saw was a clip from a good friend, Brother Byron Hurt, who created a documentary a while back called Beyond Beats and Rhymes. How many people have seen Beyond Beats and Rhymes before? Okay, so about a quarter to a third of us. I really want to recommend for those of you who are young people, who are working with young people, and even for us as adults, that we get a deeper education and we begin to reflect upon and have conversations about the imagery in our music and in our popular media. And so this piece, Beyond Beats and Rhymes, really just takes a look at not just images of women, but images of men and how we all get trapped in these boxes. And that's some of what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight.
Every 9 seconds in the United States, a woman is assaulted or beaten. Studies suggest that up to 10 million children witness some form of domestic violence annually. Nearly 1 in 5 teenage girls have been in a relationship in which they said their boyfriend threatened violence or self-harm as it relates to the relationship. Every day in the United States, more than 3 women are murdered by their husbands or their boyfriends. One out of every 6 American women has been a victim of an attempted or a completed rape in her lifetime. 17.7 million American women have been victims of an attempted rape or something over the last several years. 9 out of every 10 rape women were females. This is according to some of the 2005 statistics. If you want to break that down a little bit ethnically, of that 9 out of 10, of that, it's about 18% which are white women, 19% which are black women, about 7% which are Asian Pacific Islander women, American, Native American women, about 34%. Those of mixed race, about 24%. But it's not just women. About 3% of American men, or 1 in 33, have experienced an attempt or completed rape in their lifetime. About 2,700,000 men since 2005 have been admitted victims of sexual assault or rape. As it relates to children, 15% of sexual assault and rape victims are under the age of 12. 29% are between the ages of 12 and 17. 44% are under the age of 18. 80% are under the age of 30. 7% of girls in grades 5 to 8, or 12% of grades of girls between the ages of 9 and 12 have said they've been sexually abused. 93% of juvenile sexual assault victims know their attacker. 34% of the attackers have been family members. A little bit of information that has been kept by the Department of Justice. That's people who've admitted, come out and said that they've been attacked. On the statistics, and there's more, I'm just going to say this, the effects of rape. 3 times more of the individuals who have been sexually assaulted suffer from depression. 6 times more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorders. 13 times more likely to be abusers of alcohol. 26% more times are likely to be abusers of drugs, and 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide. So again, we know that every 2 minutes in the United States, someone is sexually assaulted. That's staggering information for us to digest. And that's only information we know about. I've said this over the years, that those who have the ability to communicate, because information is power, those who especially are gifted to be artists have historically communicated with society. And we know that we have a number of gifted, powerful communicators in the music industry today, especially in rap. I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to just have this dialogue, because we're not here to be accusatory, we're not here to point fingers, we're here to open up and have a dialogue so that people get to a place where they can speak their mind, and through speaking their mind, hopefully they'll be able to have a positive outcome.
This is a piece that I do around the country, and it's called Who You Calling a Bee? And so for purposes of our broadcast and the fact that we do have a few young people here tonight, we're going to, or smaller young people here tonight, we're going to keep it at the B level. But it's a conversation that we're having around the country about the language, the labeling, and more importantly than anything, the consequences of us adopting a behavior that we see in the entertainment industry as part of our actual daily lives. And some of the young women that are here tonight, or some of the organizations, can attest to the reality that we're dealing with every day on the street when people confuse entertainment with role models, right? And so I'm really grateful to one other person who came here, and in a moment we're going to be talking with him, and that is our brother Todd Shaw, who you know as Too Short. Because he doesn't have to come so that we can have a deeper conversation about images and ideas. But he came because this is part of who he always has been and what he's always done. But before we get into that conversation, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's out there. So the problem is that there is a significant increase of objectified images of women, especially black women, in hip-hop videos. And we're going to see one of those examples that some of you may be familiar with in a minute. So there's this increase, and we have all kinds of examples for the purposes of this evening. I won't go into detail, but I'm sure that if I ask the young people in the room, they can give me even more current examples. All we have to do, let's see, we got our friend Lil B up here, and Trina, and Clyde, and D-Lo, and so many others that are very comfortable with ideas that are part of our music. See, the difference is, I grew up, we can go to the next one. I grew up with Prince, who I thought was pretty nasty. But my mother and my grandmother heard that music and had conversations with me about what I was listening to. See, with the advent of headphones and a personal music system, we're not having conversations with each other. And so when I go into classrooms, as I do around the country, and start talking about those lyrics you just saw, folks are surprised. And there's a frequent refrain that I hear, which is, oh, you know, I'm not listening to the words, I just like the beat. How many people just like the beat? Keep it real. Oh, I have one rule when I speak, and that is, if you keep it real with me, I'll keep it real with you. So I know we're in the city council chambers, but there's no point in being here if we're not going to tell the truth. Exactly. Right? So, how many people, you know, listen to something that they wouldn't necessarily want to play for grandma? I can put my hand up. Okay, now we're talking. right? And so the reality is, we have to be able to think critically about the impact of what we hear on what we believe about ourselves and each other, what we believe is acceptable behavior. So I was first introduced to this concept. See, when I was growing up, hip-hop was extremely diverse. We had people who were disrespectful, we had people who were funny, we had people who were conscious, people who were political, people who were just fly. That was a part of the music landscape, right? But I was particularly attracted to what people label as conscious rap. And what's interesting to me about that label is I always ask myself, well, what is the opposite of that? Unconscious rap, people are like, I don't want to be no conscious rap. Okay, so then the opposite of conscious is unconscious. And that for me is not a real alternative. So I was attracted to what people call conscious rap. And there was one brother in particular who was really one of the masters of the art form, and his name is KRS-One. Some of you know him, and if you consider yourself a true fan of hip-hop, you should know him. He was part of a group called Boogie Down Productions. And I went to lecture with him one time, and he talked about this term. He said, common sense deficiency syndrome. Now, at that time, I was living in New York City. I'm originally from Detroit. But his example, ironically, was our brother Too Short. Now, I don't know whether the story is true or not. But what he said was he had gone to a Short concert, and Short came out and was like, you a B, you a H, you a F-U-B, F-U. And then what did all the girls in the front row say? Yeah. See, we have to be taking responsibility for our part in this. It's easy to put one person on trial and say it's all about them, but we vote with our dollars. We say what kind of movies we like, what kind of TV shows we like, what kind of music we support by where we spend our money. So you're the one that bought the tickets, got your hair and your nails did, and dragged your friends to go with you, made your mom spend her hard-earned money so somebody can step in the front row and call you out your way. It became a popular part of music. How did it become popular? Because it was a reflection of something real that was going on in our communities. And it was combined with a commodification of the culture. Who knows what a commodification of the culture is? A couple folks. It means that somebody bought up our culture. Hip-hop is a culture. And somebody said, oh, we can get paid off this if we just figure out what will everybody listen to. See, back then, it was some people listen to this, some people like this, some people like this, so we're going to make a lot of different kinds of hip-hop. But what's something everybody can listen to, or they're going to listen to something nasty? That's what everybody will like. When I do the workshop, I put on some songs, and then I ask you to pump your fist if that's your jam. So I'm not going to call you out today, but let's just say I started this workshop because the #1 song in America was the Whisper song. And if the Yin Yang Twins can say, "What do you see, and everybody can love it, then it says to those who want to commodify our culture, this is what we like. This is who we see ourselves as. This is what gets us hyped." What do you see in terms of the hip-hop industry that's markedly different from when you started?
Well, you know, it's pretty clear, like you showed about that era, like right around when they start calling it the bling bling era. It was the latter part, mid-90s, late 90s kind of. And, you know, what started taking place was, from my perspective, is that rap music was starting to really mimic the crack cocaine culture, which was, you know, the ballers, which was the champagne bottles, the rum, you know, the chicks in the VIP. And I remember a time where it was like no matter how many millions of records I had sold and how much, you know, reputable I was or whatever, you know, I still had to be invited into the VIP. It was baller things, you know, and then somewhere in there, like, when Bad Boy came about, it was from Master P, Merge, it was the Cash Money. The rappers started mimicking that whole thing, like we're behind the road, we pop bottles, and we in the VIP, and you know, just turned into the kind of tip drill kind of culture. But I feel like prior to that, like what we like to call it, golden era of hip hop is the late 80s, early 90s, where it was, you know, it was all about creativity. It started to be a business, and it was a lot of money involved, but it was still, you couldn't have the same haircut, you couldn't do the same dress style, you couldn't have the same like stage performance. Nothing could be alike, unless you would label a lighter and go and purchase your stuff. So prior to that, when the bling bling came in, it seemed to me like the labels, like you said, they got aware of it. They, you know, I can tell you from personal experience that I had attempted to make a 100%, you know, explicit free album. I wanted to do a project that was just like, you know, Too Short Positive album. This was like mid-90s. I attempted to do it a few times, and it was always like the same thing, like, nah, they're not really ready for that. That's not really your image, you know. But I had on the exact opposite. I had approached the president of the label and asked me to what I consider making and just all out, just dirty album. Like, would you just, you know, with this, you know, with the Death Row's doing really good, and you know, what's out there right now, you probably do really good right now. Just, you know, no singles, just make a dirty album. So I mean, it was a conscious effort with the labels to push this kind of music, and I think that if you look over like about the last 15 years of hip hop on the mainstream, they just totally, you know, weeded out the positive rap. I mean, Kanye did a great, you know, interjection into the hip hop game with, you know, thinking, just making songs that make you just thinking, like lyrics beyond. Even though he's put some misogyny in there and the Wed March in there also, but he kind of raised a lot of points in his music. And then he made way for like the Lupe Fiascos, and now it's a new breed of rappers who are making fun songs, which could be, you know, dancing and stuff. It could be a little suggestive, but at the same time, it's not, you know, definitely staying on that negative note. I think the positive part is kind of winning out now. At the same time, it's a battle. You cannot go to a label and just walk in there with this positive material and expect to get a deal. You can't, but you could go in there with the hottest, nastiest song on the internet, and it's got 2 million downloads. I can get you a check in a week for that. So that's how it is.
So what do you think in terms of why it is that we've responded as a community to not demand more for ourselves?
Well, we tend to forget, I'm speaking of hip hop, we tend to forget really fast what happened last year, what happened the year before last. So we immediately forgot KRS-One and Tribe Called Quest, and I mean, recently Nas, you know, we kind of like not checking for these messages, and you know, it's like I said, you on the internet right now, it's kind of freedom of choice, whatever kind of rap you want to hear, any language, any subject. So I just think that it became fun. It's like, you know, BET, it's just fun. It just looks so much fun. Everybody's got on jewelry, and everybody's got great bodies, and everybody's having a good time. And it's liquor, and it's you know, money flying in the air. It just looks fun. I think it's a brainwashing effect. We sold this art imitating life thing, and then it became life.
Mm-hmm. Well, it became that life depicted in the art. But what do you see in the community over that same 20 years?
Well, at the same time that you got hip hop in the 90s going into the new millennium, you know, just glorifying just diamonds and money and naked women, it was just a thing. At the same time, we're talking about the 80s babies who, if anybody was of any age in around the mid-80s, around a city like this, then you know that the first half of the 80s was completely different than the second half with the invention of crack. And these kids that I talk to now who are, they're just hitting 21 and they're, you know, in their teens, their young 20s, and you get a room full of them, they take it, they weren't raised by their parents. Their parents got life in jail and murdered at a young age, and, you know, just, you know, they pretty much raised themselves, a lot of them. So I think that you didn't have that solid foundation to you know, because even as me being a dirty rapper, I was still at home with parents who were like, you're going to college, you're doing this shit, you know, go to school, you know, it was still that foundation. I think that when you're raising yourself, and it's the music and the hip hop, and you got your iPod, you're like, you know, it's easier to just be lured into. That's why I'm like short about them like pies. I'm like, you know, so and those become your role models. You're looking at the TV, these kids' money finds the girls are like, that's what I want to do. A lot of kids come to me and say, I want to be a rapper. And I say, why? They want money and girls in their life.
So part of how we get here tonight is there's been some controversy around comments that you've made recently, and some people don't know that the conversation actually started with a rapper who was really trying to pay tribute to you, 2 Chainz, who talked about not having a father, exactly the situation that you described, not having a father, and claiming you as his father figure. How do you feel about that comment?
Well, you know, in my job, I have I came across my type of rap style, you know, slowly but surely. It was a sort of an accident at first that I blurted out a few curse words, and the reactions were like, you know, it was always like laughs and smiles, and you know, people's favorite part of the song was when they heard, you know, the F word or the B word or whatever not. And consciously, I'm like, well, let me say it 2 more times, 3 more times. You know, it kind of turned into the whole short dog image of me being a writer who I could write on any opinion I have or anything I look at the subject and just make a song of it. Me being a writer was like, write about that because that's what they like. So, you know, that's how I got into it. But there's a certain guilt factor that I deal with that when you do this for years and years and years, and of course the music is labeled for adults only, you know, but who's kidding who? It's kids above this stuff. But, you know, people come to me out every day and say, I've been bumping short down since I was 8. Like, I hear it all the time. So I deal with this guilt factor of, you know, I put this music out there, and it's like, you know, it's a negative thing. Regardless of the comedy in it, regardless of what I do in my personal life, it's still a negative energy. So what I've been doing all these years, I kind of try to balance this out myself by walking through life. You don't catch me running around Oakland down on Broadway somewhere, cussing out girls, and this whole history of Too Short, beating down women, and pimping or whatever. You know, it's just I kind of like try to balance it in my life by just doing as much positive as I can. That's how I do it. But then you got a rapper who comes along 20 years later, and he's like, man, he's telling millions of people at one time, he's like, I grew up on Too Short, he's like my father. You know what I'm saying? That's almost like, to me, that's a whole new guilty burden. Like, you're like, oh God, I turned him out, man, he's gonna turn him out. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I just feel like when I get to where I'm at right now is that I have a long list of songs. It's a very long list of songs, and the titles will read, it'd be good material for your workshop. And I just feel like on this one list of these 2 short, explicit songs, that's my discography music. You know, it wasn't all sex and very little violence in 2 short songs, but it wasn't all sex and misogyny. But I just feel like I have to counter that list and put over here is the list of what is Too Short done. On the positive side, it's not a write down. This is a from beginning to end. And the things that I've been doing, I never asked for credit for. I never really wanted it, but at the same time, I've been talking to a lot of very influential people, and they're like, you probably do want to kind of leave that legacy. You know what I'm saying? So I'm on a mission right now to kind of counter the negative energy with the positive energy. There's a lot of negative, so we got to do a lot of positive. That's how I feel about it.
Right, and I think that was one of the hard things for me in preparing for tonight is, we were having this conversation many years ago, and even just the other day we were talking about, the little 5-year-old that knows blow the whistle and how that guilty feeling that it gave you. And I think back to a conversation we had probably about 4 or 5 years ago when you came to saw one of my workshops, and then you were talking about your legacy and how you didn't want to be remembered as the bitch guy, right? And I felt excited. I was out there talking to people like, man, we got to surround this brother. He needs our support. I felt like we as a community have a role here too. And right in the middle of that, Blow the Whistle came out. And there was this feeling that I had of the contradiction and how do I live with the contradiction, and how do you live with the contradiction? And then, most recently, the double XL comments came out. Can you talk a little bit about what happened to those who don't know?
Well, yeah, it was the whole 2 Chainz thing. Kind of the guy got a little excited, I guess. He was doing an interview with me about my new album coming out. And he was basically, he was like, hey, you got people like 2 Chainz saying you raised him, so, I was told that this was some internet thing they were going to post on their website that was, I guess it was to be like different artists, some kind of funny stuff. If I would have put it, just stop and look at the big picture of it, I'm like, why would I even say these words to something that's recording? But at the same time, I sat there and I went along with the whole thing, and it's like, well, if 2 Short was giving out some advice to little 2 Chainz, it kind of go like this, and probably about 3 or 4 weeks later, I guess they posted this thing a few weeks later, and they totally kind of left out the interview that we did, and they just took that one thing. And from what I understand, I never got to see it on their site, but from what I understand, it really read point blank 2 Short sloppy advice. That's it. And then they started out this whole instructional actions on how to, get some little girl. And so I was kind of referring to childhood experiences that I had know that a lot of people can relate to, but it was not appropriate. And it was like when I read it back, and people came to me and they were like, that's just wrong. I was like, it's a joke. And they're like, okay, whatever. So we put some statement out. Totally taken out of context, it was a joke. But that, that kind of fueled the fire a little bit.
Right.
So 2-3 days go by, and I'm like, man, miss me with this, because this comes from Joe Livio. And I started reading the different blogs and different, following stuff on people's Twitter and stuff. And it was coming to light. I'm reading what the females sent back to each other. And they're upset. They kept saying, does he not get it? And I'm just, it was like 3 or 4 days into it, I'm just not getting it. And I started to get it, I'm starting to read that this is not really about anything other than sisters being attacked.
Right. And you said people were saying things like you were a pedophile, you were advocating rape, and
teaching rape. I was teaching rape, and I was teaching little boys how to rape little girls, whatever. And
I want to just clarify. I was part of one of those coalitions, the We Are the 44% coalition, and there were a group of sisters who came together to really say the tagline for Twitter was, "It's bigger than 2 Short." Because it was never about having a witch hunt to come after you. It was always about to say, we have to raise awareness that when your comments were, about how a young boy could go to the hole with a girl. And the reality is, a lot of people still haven't heard about it. But when I saw it, as a mother with 4 daughters, what I recognized, and we'll get into this a little bit in terms of your conversations with Dreamhampton, what I felt was, damn, I know this brother. I know Todd. I tell people all the time, I met Todd, I hung out with Todd, but I don't even really own 2 Short album. You know what I'm saying? That's not my get down. But what I felt like was, I felt that sense of you're trapped. You're trapped in an industry that's allowing you to go too far. Because what I know when I saw that is some little boy who thinks this is what, not just because you said it, but even because this is what's going on in the playground. It's already some boys in the playground who's pushing the girl up against the wall and sticking their hands in their pants. And he's going to jail nowadays. That's assault. And even if he gets away with it, she's walking away from that situation with a level of shame and pain and a sense of violation. And I feel what you're saying in that, a lot of people are really angry, how could you not know that? But I'm like, a lot of people are being hypocrites. Because I know 500,000 dudes who will grab a girl in the butt. If I had to count the number of times I've been hit or grabbed at a club, that's a whole lot of stuff.
That's what happened. And within the week, I was more or less, I started being really intrigued by the previous statements. like, you know, it's not like, I wasn't taking it as a, oh my God, I gotta defend myself for this. I was really kind of, it was hitting me like an educational thing. So I decided that in all the trails that I was following, it all kept leading back to like Dream Happy. She was kind of had this focus on her, and I know we had mutual friends, so I reached out to Dream. I was like, this is what I want to talk to you about, not about what happened, but about, you know, what could make this better, not for me, but for the situation. So we had a conversation, and I didn't know what to expect, and she told me she didn't know what to expect either, but we went for it, and we talked, and during the conversation, she was bringing up some of the stuff that I'm hearing today about, you know, women being victims, and the one thing that really like stuck with me, she was like, well, I understand, we all know the little games of how to go get it, we know the games that we played, out in the house and all the stuff we did, exploring and experimenting and stuff, but she was showing me like as a child, you know, as a little girl, that you have these moments that can happen to many little girls. It's as simple as a little boy running up, smack on the butt, and run off. It's you could touch her on the breast and run off. You know, she said she wanted to put her top down and she was in the pool as a little girl. And she's like, what boys don't know, we laugh and giggle. And we do all kinds of stuff as far, you know, from broken to, you know, walking to each other, someone's finger and stuff like that. And, you know, at 45 years old, I'm thinking to myself, you know, this is how it was. I mean, we came up that age, I mean, we're not supposed to, it's really wrong to run this message back to kids, but deep down, so I'm like, that's how it was. And I'm talking to Dream, and she's like, yeah, that's how it was, but did you know that when you do that, little girls walk away traumatized? Some little girls, you know, it affects them their entire life. And if you really break it down, this is her talking on the phone, if you really just break it down, think about it. You walk up to the grade, you do that, all of a sudden you just cry, that is an assault. And I'm like, I kind of get it, and we talk, and she starts running these stats and stuff, and I kind of felt like in all my intentions of wanting to right this wrong, I still wasn't even prepared to even know the complete right from wrong. So now that I'm hearing what I'm hearing now, and these stats are like, I've never heard these stats before, the 44% under 18, and you know, my man was running off there, and it's just like, I feel like beyond, above and beyond whatever I just experienced, and whatever I had done in the past, whatever I planned on doing, it's even bigger than that. It's just like, I feel like hip hop as a whole, me, myself, we have a certain responsibility, not as role models, but just as we should be able to see where our industry came and what it represents, and just kind of like draw the line a little bit. And I would say you have to stop, but at least there's got to be some kind of message out there that it's like, you know, the kids can't be taking this with face value. It's not much different than a movie when the lights go off and the director of college rap. Same thing happens on the video. Said they call it rap. The cars get back on the tow truck. The girls put their clothes back on. Everybody goes on their normal life with BET, and you know, the World Star videos, we see it as we film it, and it's like you know, I guess it's being recycled into the community without the cameras now. You just go to a house party, everybody's talking about everybody, you know, so we got to pull it back in a little bit, I feel.
Right. I mean, one of the things that, you know, this was a really powerful interview with you and Dream that was in Ebony, and one of the things that she said that really struck me as being something that I don't think people realize, she said, you know, this is not about the anger that we have as feminists or just that sense of outrage that caused us to form the coalition in the first place. It's not about a hatred of black men, a hatred of hip hop. Dream, of course, has been a champion of hip hop, you know, forever. But, and so am I, right? I think one of the things that's hard for people to understand is that it's the love that we have for brothers that makes it so much harder. Because there is this dismissiveness, there is this sense of it's a joke or you're taking it too seriously. And if it were a stranger, that's awful. But when you have to still be around people who can't respect the boundaries or the impact that their actions have on you. So I'm dealing with this all the time because I'm out here in the community working with girls. So a girl that I work with, she wouldn't give a guy her number, and she gets hit in the face with a bottle. And what's the relationship between that and the old Snoop Dr. Dre video where there's the girl in the party who stuck up and they spray her with the bottle, right? So now we just moved from spraying her with the bottle in the video to throwing the bottle at her face in the town. And that's what I get to see every day in this work. And I feel like that's the part of this conversation that sometimes gets missed. It's the 2 Chainz story that really is the most powerful thing in this whole thing to me. Because the reality is we wish that all of us were growing up with 2 parents who'd be like, yeah, I know what you saw on TV, but you're not coming in here, you know, acting like that. But that's not the reality. And I feel that our boys are just as much trapped up in this as the girls are. Because they feel like in order to be a man, I don't know what a man is. I don't have a man showing me what a man is. So I gotta go to what I see that a man is. I gotta imagine what a man is. And when hip hop doesn't have imagination in it, and it's just going to that lowest common denominator. So let's move into the healing aspect. What do you think in terms of being out here and the work that you've done? Talk a little bit about what you've done in the community and what you think can create healing.
Well, over the past few years, I've been, you know, just making myself accessible for, you know, anything like coming up and speaking at work fairs or, you know, some of the seminars they do up at YU. So, you know, I've been in like events where the city asks me to come out, just be a presence, just be a part of it. But I feel like somewhere in there, bigger than a PSA or something like that, it just needs to be a continuous dialogue coming from some of the artists, because I think if, as a whole, if we start to present this to hip hop, you're not going to get any love from the corporations that sell this stuff. They don't want that message out there. But if you really presented this stuff to a lot of the rappers, I don't think they would mind. Like, you know, because it's pretty much clear as a bell that we're at this boiling point. And I personally have never felt like it was hip hop. I feel like it's entertainment, because I look at a lot of movies, a lot of TV. I take it in, you know, from, you know, all the entertainment aspects, and just as a rapper, I'm always like critical of the other forms of entertainment, because I look at it to just give myself some peace of mind that, you know, it's not just rap. If you looked at the media and the, you know, perception of the media, every time, you know, there's a proven link between hip hop and some crime or some behavior, it's like, look what hip hop's doing to the kids in the community. It's hip hop, but it's all of entertainment. We are visualizing and hearing sex and violence all day, every day, and I just think that freedom of speech is a great thing, but we have pushed the envelope in a very short period of time. We were just in the 1950s and 60s where this would be before some congressional committee being put away as communists or something if we were rapping this stuff 30, 40 years ago, you know? So I just feel like we probably need to try to find some kind of way to police ourselves a little bit. And if not, pulling back on the images, because I always felt like hip hop went through the cycles, but it appears to be this sexual cycle
doesn't seem like it's coming to an end.
And I just feel like if you can't wipe it out, you're not gonna wipe out. The internet's like a monster. You're not gonna wipe it out.
Excuse me. I just want to interrupt, and I hate to interrupt this engaging conversation. You guys have really expressed a lot of information. However, we do have some questions from the audience that I'd like to identify and address at this time.
Yeah, so I got the wave over there, so I'm gonna wrap up this section. And so what I hear you saying is that, you know, it's time for us to really think about how do we, in my mind, partner. Like, I see my role as an activist to help push the envelope, right? We have a responsibility to begin to, one, like I said, vote with our dollar and think about what it is that we're promoting, but we also have a responsibility to hold each other accountable. And I think that's part of what this forum is. But one of the things that we want to do is open up and make sure that we get some questions from other folks. And then to your point, I think I'm going to show another little clip input as we get ready to close. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can we give a hand for this? This is you instructions just provided by saying they do what makes them money. So is more money important than saving our youth? That's the first part of the question. Is more money important than saving our youth? Do you want to address that?
Well, I personally feel like you know, in this in my particular case, it is very intoxicating, the lure of the money when you, at a young age, I'm 21, 22 years old, and I'm realizing that, you know, these subjects, which, you know, I'm very conscious at that time, these are not positive subjects. And if you listen to some of the early Too Short albums, I would make a lot of positive music. Yeah. And it kind of, if you check the evolution, it kind of, the percentages kind of went down. It was more and more explicit, more and more explicit. But I truly feel like you look in the mirror one day and you ask yourself that question, and you're like, you know, what do I do? At this point, it's probably been like 5 years with me myself. I can't speak for any other hip hop artist, but for about the last 5 years, I've been trying to tussle with myself to drop the whole explicit thing. But I gotta be honest with you, it's just, it's business, it's a job, and I really, you know, I'm really like day to day, as we sit here right now, this is a battle. Like I really have a problem with continuing to put out those type of messages, but at the same time, when somebody calls you at 10 a.m. and say, we got a $100,000 check for you for some bad messages, you know, I mean, that's the reality.
Yes, sir. The next question is it the artist's responsibility to shape the industry, or is it the industry that shapes the artist? You kind of alluded to that.
Well, if I'm understanding correctly, I really think when you speak of the industry, I'm thinking of the people who sell it and the people who buy it. Right. The labels and the consumers. And, you know, artists, just like if you paint a picture and you're making up some music or whatever, it's like you're trying to either relay some kind of message or satisfy some kind of person who's going to look at it or buy it or whatever. And I think in the case of hip hop, a lot of artists are making what they think will sell. That's what I think we're at right now, and a lot of labels have convinced us that this is what will sell. So if you present 15 songs, 3 of them have a message that could be, you know, positive in the community, and then, you know, 3 other songs are like "Shake Your Booty." Right. The label's like, "Let's shoot that video right now, shake your booty." That's where it's at. Right. And it's like the artist is pretty much, if you're on a major label, the artist is not in control of that at all. Yeah. At all.
Okay. Next question: how can you be an ally to organizations like A Safe Place in their effort to prevent intimate partner abuse?
How can I?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you know, I have a message to give, and I feel like I represent something that a younger person might look at me and say, I believe everything he said. I want to be like Too Short. I want to be that negative thing with Too Short. And I personally feel like I have a message that I've been preaching the same message, and it's like, you do realize that I've never been a pimp. You do realize that I don't walk off stage and slap girls and call them out their name and then expect them to be with me for that behavior. And you know, the message is that I mean, it's just you gotta really, like, if that's what you want to be like Too Short, you want to be like a player with some money, you might want to go to school and learn to be a gentleman. And if you look at the long term of cats my age, and we talk about what we did after high school, you know, all the guys who were supposed to be like the college nerds or whatever, they run around in Oakland right now, Beamers and Benzes, and driving up to their house. And, you know, the cats who was hardcore in the streets, they, you know, on parole or something right now. So that's the reality. Yeah.
So I wanted to add to that too, that part of what it is opportunities like this. When we have an opportunity to expose these contradictions, right? Because what I feel and what I hear is the sense that we all feel like it's a trap. It's a trap. You can't turn on the radio and listen to something that isn't disrespecting women. Or you can't listen for longer than an hour and expect not to hear something like that. And so there's this sense of trap, but then there's this perception that we have that you have some power, that you've established yourself, and at what point is it enough money that now you can say, okay, I can turn away and do something else? Or at what point do we continue as the community, as activists, to highlight this other part of who you are and what you do, so that there is a balance for our young people to see? Because it's not really on just short, right? It's not him that's gonna, the solution is if we have men in our community that were showing another idea of what men are. That's why I'm grateful that this is put together by 100 Black men, because that's the solution. Is when we have a different idea, when you see that's not how a man acts, what I see on the video, then that's when you learn something different.
Okay, I'm getting so many cues on this end.
Yes.
I'm going to bring the panelists up now so that they can have some input to the discussion as well, so we don't have Mr. Too Short just on the hot seat right now. So I want to introduce Mr. Halo Benjamin, Ms. Jazz Huston, Mr. Belafonte Anderson, Ms. Carolyn Russell. Is David here?
Not here.
Not here, okay.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
Right there.
yeah. Ms. Lily Hunt, and this is
Statement like that, and it never occurred to me that our childhood games were a form of assault, sexual assault. It's just that kind of an eye opener, and then to hear the stats alone is enough to make somebody mom. So I know that I have a loud voice, and I know that hip hop as a whole pretty much wastes our voice. We use it in the young stages. We help elect Obama hip hop as we put it out there, but at the same time, we won't speak on politics. As a whole, we don't do it.
So what I'd like to do now is just to have the panelists now that they're seated to just formally introduce themselves for 2 minutes, take 2 minutes just to say a few words. And we'll start with Mr. Benjamin.
Again, my name is Halo.
My
name is Halo Benjamin. I've grown up in the greater Bay Area. I was born in Hayward. I grew up just throughout the Bay, moved around a lot, whether being in San Francisco or out in Pittsburgh, in the deep East Bay or Richmond. So I've just kind of been around the area as a 21-year-old growing up and trying to kind of overcome what is expected of me from any particular societal group. I'm a poet. I've been a poet probably for the past seven years or so since I was about 14. First hip-hop song I think was Montel Jordan, This Is How We Do It. And I wasn't even allowed to listen to hip-hop in my house, and we snuck it in and we listened to it anyway, which I'm sure people who are older can attest to whatever music was coming out during their time, whatever new music was the fad. And really, I'm appreciative to be here. I'm honored to be here. I don't have any qualifications other than grace that allows me to sit on the panel. So I'm just appreciative. That's really all I have to say.
I'm sinful without my savior. He dug me out of behemoth, the beast that would have me mating with prostitute acting heathen and heathenistic at best, and I immediately tucked in my vest, drinking demons from Seagram bottles, succubus sucking my neck. Check. Living circumspect from the jump, I see loyalties crisscross from the beast in his deadly mark to the cross with which we should walk. But I normally ignore the man, move a step when I see the hand, and I'm trying to be reprogrammed. It's a process. No nappy hair can just easily shake them chemicals. Music these days is whimsical. Sex has always been temporal. Temper tantrum from touchy folk. Coming hard as an antelope, stampeding on lion crying minds. December 24th, go. With no recollection of slow, was a bobbing and weaving fetus. That's more than some soul could say. They got knocked out by that plan B. It's a doggy dog world that we in. Whether you be African, Islander, Indian, Korean, it's harder trying to be vegan. My future daughter is teething on radioactive debris. Less I can do my Dougie, right into them tidy whiteys. Be that quail man. Instead of eating poach, I might be citing. Topple order presiding. Corruption and corporation with flawless incorporated. The flawless, the mission statement. Hold tight, I need some more pages.
My name is Godfather Anderson. And I work with Safe Place. And I've been living in New Orleans and Baton Rouge for the last 2 years or more. And I just resigned back to the Bay Area. it's a very wonderful experience to work for a safe place. It's very rewarding, and it's a lot of information. And I think it's important for each and every one of us to educate, deliberate, and that's what's very important here, is to pay attention to details and pay attention to what we're really saying, because this is very serious. I've been working in the mental health department for 16 years, and I worked in, like I said, when I was in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, I worked with the youth from New Orleans East during the Katrina hurricane problems and psychologically, situations in post-traumatic stress syndrome. And it's been really rewarding to see a change in some of the situations that I've actually have worked out with in my entire career. I enjoy working, like I say, in this population because it's something that's very needed. But like I say, it's very important for us to pay attention to this. This is something I want you to walk out of here. I want you to think about. It's very important. Thank you. David D.
My name is David D. Somebody who's been part of hip-hop since the late 70s. I currently teach over at San Francisco State and do a syndicated radio show, which is heard every day in various places around the country. I consider myself a media justice advocate, somebody who understands clearly the impact that presentation in media has had, not just on our communities, but the way it's used systemically around the world to demonize, dehumanize, and how to see people in ways in which they weren't intended. I'll just say, for being part of this panel, I think it's pretty important that something that is not necessarily being spoken but is taking place, we should hold up high, which is that we're having direct conversation. There's no media middleman interpreting what we're hearing today between people coming from various aspects of the community. It's not CBS or ABC or some other newspaper misinterpreting or limiting or redefining what is being said for 100 black men. And so there we hear what Too Short is saying, and what Benjamin is saying, and what Eureka is saying, and at the same time, we have the opportunity to hear directly from Short in the full entirety of what he's saying in full context, and get the nuances and subtleties. Not having that direct communication, we got to break that habit of depending upon outsiders to validate our words because they happen to be on a Clear Channel or BET. It kills us at the end of the day. And so what I hope we get out of that is that we have everybody's names and numbers, and that I think by us being here that we have a commitment to the betterment of our community, and that starts when we are able to pick up a phone and say, what's up, Short? Or Short can pick up and say, what's up, 100 black men? And we can all come together and craft solutions that are going to be very specific and very uplifting and very unique for us as a community versus what somebody else's agenda would have us believe. So thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Lillian.
Hi, so I'm a community activist as well as an entrepreneur. I volunteer with the Safe Place 16 program. I was a victim of domestic violence, so I take my personal story and I reach out to the team in our community. I grew up in East Oakland. I went to Castlemont, raised in Spring Park, Brookfield, lived in the village. I grew up, hip-hop was a big influence on my life. I ended up marrying a man who was twice my age. I went through the verbal, the physical, the mental, all of the above. So I pretty much speak from the victims, get down survivors aspect, and hopefully I can provide some insight to young women who do not have the self-esteem that's needed to really get into these relationships, etc. So, just learning to differentiate hip-hop and, what's real and what's not. So, that's mine.
Thank you. So, Sarah?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nasir. I'm a 25-year-old up-and-coming spoken word hip-hop artist and speaker, community advocate. 2 years ago, I'm pretty sure a lot of you may have heard about the story, but almost 2 years ago in May, African-American woman's body was found underneath the Bay Bridge inside of a suitcase in the water. Well, that woman was my mother, and she died in a domestic violence relationship. So I'm here because hip-hop, I consider myself like a son of hip-hop. I love hip-hop. I've always loved hip-hop since I was little. I grew up definitely listening, and my biggest inspiration was Tupac Shakur. And so my message is just really to reach out to all communities, because how I look at it is, I don't look at us as a difference between race, because we're all a part of the human race. So I don't believe in difference in race or anything, but I do believe in difference in social class. And so my message is to just, I believe in God, so I have a strong belief in God. I'm very spiritual when it comes to that. And I like to incorporate that into a lot of my hip hop, a lot of my music, a lot of my spoken word, and a lot of just the messages that I just give out into the world. Because even though what happened to my mom was a tragedy, it was also a blessing, because I'm actually able to be here to talk to all of you out in the crowd. You know, if I can say anybody's life, just one person's life, that's just a great honor. I feel honored to be here as well.
Just is Jazz.
Peace, my name is Jasmine Hudson. I'm a spoken word artist and an educator here in the Bay Area. I'm also a former foster youth and an advocate for youth in the foster care system and the juvenile justice system. I teach at Richmond High School. I teach a spoken word and literacy arts class, and I also teach workshops around sexism and hip hop. And as well, like Lily, I would like to say now a victim of domestic violence. I was in a domestic violence relationship from the age of 12 all the way to 16. I've been to over 26 different schools here in Oakland and around Northern California in 30-something different foster homes. And what I do now is work with a lot of young girls addressing these issues about sexism and hip hop, domestic violence, and speaking out. It was somebody coming in and caring enough about me that changed my life and put me on the right path. And so now I feel, as an Oakland native, an East Oakland native, that is my duty and my job and my charge to do the same. Thank you.
I'm going to get back to the questions from the audience. I've gotten several since everyone was doing their introductions. But the first one I want to start off with is more of a comment versus a question. And it states, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment that is of relevance. My twin and I fall under the statistics of the whole sexual harassment dilemma. At age 12, I was under the attempted rape, and I just found out about 2 weeks ago that my twin was sexually molested when we were 3 years old. I don't know what or who to blame. Comments?
Okay. I think we might want to offer resources for the individual, and we are available after this session or during the session for anyone who would like to follow up for individual resources. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll start off, please.
Yeah, I'm a victim of rape as well. The person I was in a relationship with for several years, and it's hard. I think the first step, even being anonymous and speaking out about it, is the first step to healing. There's a lot of folks in this room that if you want to approach me afterwards and you stay anonymous, that you can deal with me. I have a young women's support group that I run twice a month, and I would love to deal with you after.
And I think what Jack said, just to build on that, is it's important to validate our anger, but also to focus on our healing. Because looking for who to blame, right? When we are angry and we come from that place forever and we carry it, we become stuck in our victim role. And I love what Jack said about becoming a victor. And in order to do that, eventually, not right now, but eventually, you do have to move past the blame stage and focus on how do I heal myself.
I can't speak from a victim as far as being raped role, but for somebody who was pushed into this line of work with what happened with my mom, and I have a very spiritual mindset about myself, to the person who said that, and to your twin, I feel like first and foremost you need to understand that you are strong regardless of what happened to you, because you're still here. There's a lot of people who go through these situations and they blow their brains out. So one step that I always say to healing is forgiveness. And that's the reason why I'm still dealing with my healing with the loss of my mom, but at the same time, I have forgiven the man who killed her. And that's big, and I always talk about that. That's very big. But once you get that forgiveness, then the strength begins to come through you, and then people can see that. And you want to be, like we're talking about, role models. You want to be a role model. You know, take that tragedy of what happened to you, and like I said, look at yourself in the mirror every day, and just think of the blessing that it is for you to even be able to look at yourself in the mirror, because there's some people who don't even get that chance anymore.
Okay, a two-part question again. Hip-hop often promotes just casual sex. The sex in situations totally void of respect. These sexual unions often create children. What do you think the impact is on these kids? Is the first question. And how does that impact who we are now and what we would be a generation from now? So we talk about generational situations and existence.
I would say one of the challenges that we have is that first, when we put on the industry hat, it's always been for a very long time that the industry model has been sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This is going back for decades. And hip-hop in the beginning was counter to that, but now that hip-hop is the predominant music form, it fits that formula, at least in terms of the commercial aspect that's presented. So we should be very aware that those who present it, whether they're behind the camera or on the radio stations, not the DJs, but the person who tells the DJ what to play, you're talking about 50, 45, 50-year-old men and women who are peddling adult-themed material to our kids. And that becomes a challenge that, unfortunately, it results in the values that we want to put towards our youth being undermined systematically. With that being said, one of the solutions that I would like to see crafted, since we are in City Hall and have people that can make decisions, I think that at a very young age, maybe starting at 6, 7, we should have some sort of class, not just one-day class, but a whole year curriculum, the way that we used to have civics, where we're talking about what men and little boys are supposed to do in terms of respect. You know, what little girls are supposed to expect from men and how they're supposed to engage one another. Can we have a year-long class on conflict resolution? Can we make it so that we're very familiar that when we see certain types of behaviors and gestures in song and dance, that we can already separate that and think critically at age 6 and 7 and not really expect that somebody's parent is going to do it when they're not doing it. Not expect that the radio or BET or a particular artist is going to magically be able to transfer, get that information to us and we take it in without only knowing that artist 1 or 2 times versus what they're being fed day in and day out. So I think that might be something that would start to help maybe redefine the values that we take. Because right now, we're getting a steady diet of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And from my work, most people don't have parents who are telling them about the birds and the bees, much less how to relate and how to pull and how to talk to and date and do all these things. So guess what? Whoever is shown day in and day out becomes the role model, whether they realize it or not. And that's reflected not only just in the music, but in the internet culture, porn culture, which is part of that, entertainment, in general. Even some of the highest offices of the land tend to underscore that type of ethos, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, look at some of the seedy behavior that we see of some of our leaders. Some of them in the pulpit, some of them sitting in Congress. So we need to change that all the way around. And I would say that we have to start that in our schools. And maybe some of the decision makers out here can help make sure that these programs are taught early and often to our youth.
Lily wants to say something about that too, Ms. Winter.
I just want to know what happens to censorship on the radios. Like, I have children now, and it seems like every single song, if not every other song, is about sex. And some of the words that they're even allowed to say on the radio, I don't remember them being allowed to say those things when I was a kid. It's just there's no boundaries.
Let me just say, when Michael Powell was the head of the FCC, we were in New York because what was going on in New York, we had white program directors heading up radio stations like Hot 97, which was the predominant station, Listen to Us, that were allowing the N-word to be used all across, not just in songs, but their DJs. Many of them who weren't even black were using this on the regular. In the air. There was a tribunal, and people came out, this was 2003, and I remember running into Michael Powell, and I was talking to him about the concerns that people had. He told me, he said, well, you don't have to listen to the radio, you now have the internet. That was the solution. And so what is happening now is that radio feel they're in competition with people who have now gone online. So they're now actually pushing to allow the restrictions that they do have to be lifted. So in the next year or so, what you think you want to have censored down, that's about to be increased. It's going to get even more seedy and more shady, and that's just the reality and the challenge that we have.
So Statistical want to get in. Fellas, we're not giving. I'm sorry, see, I can't see the thing. So thank you, Mr. Bella.
Yes. Well, just to kind of piggyback on a few things that I was sitting there thinking, and just something, just a reminder that men are victims as well. Okay? How many men, well, I'm going to ask you a question. All the men stand up, please. All the men stand up. Look at myself.
Rise.
Okay.
Rise.
Ask yourself the question, have you ever been a victim? You got to ask yourself that question. Okay? Now, when you think about that, a lot of times when we're the victims, and it's not nothing to where, just trying to, it's a playing field to where a lot of us as men, we don't know how to cope with it. We don't know how to explain ourselves or express what we go through or what you go through. A lot of times, when you feel like you're being psychologically abused, financially abused, physically abused, okay, you run to the restroom, run to the bathroom, or you run to hang out with your boys, or you go have a drink, whatever, go out to the bar, whatever. You escape it, and you don't say anything about it. Okay? And then what happens? This anger builds up. And then it comes out in another language. Okay? So what we're doing now, we're conducting men groups. So if those with interest, see me after this and we can talk about it. Okay? Just to piggyback.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on just a couple of things. And what Too Short mentioned earlier, and I think it's very important about when he mentioned brainwash. It's very important for you to realize the fantasy and the reality. When he said back then, after the video, they put the cars back on the truck and go back to the regular style clothing. Don't they tell you something? It's not real. They go to the bank while others go to the coroner's office. Okay, so the real, you got to learn to separate the reality from the fantasy. It's like earlier when one of the facilitators, she spoke the fact that in an audience when they use the B word, okay? Now, if someone in a grocery store calls you a B, what happens? But if somebody else calls you a B in another environment, it's acceptable. It's acceptable. So what I'm trying to say here is this: understanding that your own psychology. We have, a long ways to go, but this is good that we're dialoguing with this because it helps to get educated to liberate. It's important. So.
Thank you. There was a question that was asked that we didn't really address, and I want to make sure that we get to that. I know we're getting close to our close, but the question really was about what happens to us as a people over generations when these issues don't get addressed. And I think that's our call to action. It's not enough for us to say we wish there wasn't a consolidation in the media. It's not enough for us to say we wish it wasn't racially motivated. Michelle Crow's talking about, Michelle Alexander is talking about the new Jim Crow laws. There is a disproportionate impact on our community just because of our hyper incarceration. So we talked about these young brothers who are not out here in the homes, and so they are looking for a male role model. So it becomes imperative that those who have children take care of them. Somebody told me the most revolutionary thing you can do is raise a healthy family. Right? Because a lot of us want to be activists with somebody else's kids, but then don't want to take care of our own. Another thing we have to do is we have to join forces Too much of what happens in the nonprofit community is about competition, right? Too much of what happens in the artist community is about competition. And there was a time where it was an integral part of hip hop, that folks came together for Stop the Violence or Human Education Against Violence. And there is an opportunity here for us to come together and address this lack of role models in our community and really push back. And it's going to take all of us. We have to push back against, we can't just be complacent, be like, oh, you can't do nothing about what's on the radio. Or you can't do nothing about, that's just how music is these days. It really literally is a call to action for every single one of us to look at what is it that we can influence. Can we influence what's popular? Can we influence what's put out there? Can we influence what's covered? Can we influence, I say, if all you can do is influence your own children, that's the place to start. If all you can do is influence yourself, that's the place to start. But if you're in a position like a David D or like Karen or like Shorter like me, then it's time to start building with other people. And that really is what I wanted to say in terms of a call to action, because there is a state of emergency in our community. This is the biggest, most dangerous generation gap in history between the civil rights generation and the hip hop generation. And in that gap, a whole generation of young people got locked up. And their children are coming up next. And they're looking to see who's going to reach across that gap. Who's going to fill that void? When are we going to say, this is not the worst thing we've ever been through? This is not slavery. Other than it's mental slavery.
Yes.
I just wanted to make one more comment in addition to what you said. I think the call to action for me, after working in this work for nearly 25 years, we have not involved African American men in the domestic violence movement, and I think men have felt sometimes alienated from that movement. But this is a movement for families, and I wanted to say that because historically a safe place has served women and children. But we know that men are victims, and we want to come together as a community, men and women working together, rather than women working to create organizations for women, by women. So I want to thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Also, I want to piggyback on the course of action. For the youth, I want y'all to understand that your voice is powerful. Use your voice, because I know growing up, when I was growing up, and I'm 25, so I'm not that far away from y'all. Y'all might think so just because there might be a 10-year gap. Some of y'all might be 15 and think, oh, he's 25. I know. And I know that sometimes the older generation do look down on us. You know what I'm saying? They do look down on us sometimes, but that don't mean don't get your voice out there. Get your voice out there, because when I was growing up, I always made sure that regardless of if you think what I'm saying is some BS or not, you go hear it. You know what I'm saying? And whether you respect it or not, you still go hear it. Because eventually it's going to resonate somewhere deep down in your heart, and you go hear what I'm saying. So don't be afraid to speak up, because like I said, the voice is one of the most powerful weapons you can have.
So I want to invite each panelist, actually, as we're about to end, shortly, to give their call to action. We never want to present something like this and just lift up what the problem is. And so if we can continue on in this vein and allow each of you to reflect on what you feel is most important in terms of urging our folks to move forward. So we'll go with Lily.
I think everyone feels that it's one of the problems. It takes a village to raise a child, and a lot of times we don't want to take ownership, like, oh, well, it's the parents' fault, or the church is blaming the street, and the street is blaming whoever it may be, But I just honestly think that it takes a village, and if we all start to take accountability for our actions, we will see a change in the generations that are to come. So just remember that.
I think I'd make a comment to say, you still want to consider whether or not pop culture, hip-hop, and rap has an influence on teen violence prevention. Does it perpetuate violence, or does it enhance prevention? So that's the comment and consideration. Thank you.
So I would say my call to action is to first of all understand that anything, no matter how insurmountable it looks, can be defeated. I mean, Clear Channel owns all these radio stations, but it's $18 billion in debt, so it can be defeated. With that being said, I think what we need to do is start validating each other and start validating things that are within our own means. Start holding the folks who are doing the good work right around you and start tweeting about them, Facebooking about them, and gossiping and talking up those individuals that are doing positive things versus, wishing that somebody who doesn't have our best interest at heart will somehow get a heart and change things around. That would be my call to action. And definitely, I want to reemphasize that we need to have some sort of curriculum that is taught day in and day out in our schools to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we should expect from one another.
Caleb, thank you.
I would say that my call to action is definitely first and foremost to listen to one another. If you think about your own body for a moment, your body will tell you what you need. Your throat begins to get dry as it relates to you that you're dehydrated. And so we are a body collectively as a community. And so when you see multiple members of your peer group passing away, when you see multiple members of your peer group becoming incarcerated, when you see multiple members of your peer group engaging in behavior that would put you in harm's way, then it causes you to begin to listen to your body, begin to listen to your body. Your body is your classroom, your body is your family, your body is your immediate group of friends. And as you begin to listen to what's going on around you, you can start to address some of the things that are going on. So I think it's definitely important for all of us. And again, I'm young myself, but it's important for me to listen to the 18-year-old and listen to the 25-year-old because then we can communicate effectively with what we need from each other. I think there's something seriously we're lacking in terms of communication with one another. We don't keep it real with one another. Most girls don't keep it real with other girls and other guys don't keep it real with other guys. We have a problem with telling the truth, and we have a problem with being honest. And so if we start just keeping it 100 with one another, I think we'll see a big difference in our trajectory in terms of where we're going as a generation. So that's my call to action.
Thank you.
I would say, I agree with some of what Hale said and definitely what David said, is that my call to action would be educating. A lot of young folks already have a language established around death. Death is a big issue here in the Bay Area in Oakland. I just recently performed at that school where the young girl, a 15-year-old girl, was stabbed to death by her boyfriend, and he hung himself shortly after that, and then she left behind a 9-month-old child. And when I walked into that room, I felt like it was my charge to speak and open up the space for them to talk. Because when I was 6 years old, I didn't know anything about an RIP t-shirt or hoodie or banner. I wouldn't even have known what to write on a grievance card. I remember the first time a woman died was in the church, and I asked my dad, I said, well, what do we say when people die? He said, well, just say I'm praying for your family and wishing you love. So now that our generation has already created a language around death, a language around negativity and hip-hop and sexism, we now need to recreate that language and make positivity provocative again. Like if we want to hear a new type of music, if we want to see a new imagery, we have to make that provocative. A lot of folks in this room have a level of popularity here, Twitter, Facebook, throughout the community, to use that little bit of popularity to talk about forums and create forums. There's a young lady in the room right now named Jamila. She just did a social forum over the weekend where a whole bunch of young folks in their 20s, in college grads, and all we did was sit there for like 3-4 hours talking about issues in the community and music and family, and then we all came up with strategies for healing. So we could come with more solution-based outcomes and more workshops and education forums, because, Mr. Belafonte made a comment about separating the reality from the faith. The truth is that video culture has become a reality here in the Bay. It is tennis strips with several girls and cars. When they get their first little bit of money, that's when they go on the cop. And so we can't tell our youth that this isn't a reality, because death culture, pimp culture, drug culture, that has become our reality. We are the generation after crack. So addressing these things and speaking about these things and making like positivity provocative again and educating, I think, is the first step, and that's my call to action.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Wilkinson?
Yes, my call to action, I always like to use this term, educate to liberate. And what do I mean by that? That means that educate yourself, learn who you are, learn the psychology about you, understand your psychology before you can understand anybody else's psychology. Once you understand that, you can move on. You can liberate yourself. That means you become free to understand. So you can understand how to be, this analytical when you watch a video, whichever. You know between the difference of what's reality and what's not reality, like the Cynthia was saying, to where, yes, it become a reality. And, most important is that you have to pay attention. You must pay attention. You have to communicate, the younger generation versus the generation that I'm in a sense. You guys have a very much, I would say, impact on each other. You communicate well, with each other. Where there's the fact that if somebody is going through anything, a crisis or whichever it may be, learn to, communicate, to call her up or call him up and ask, are you okay? Don't wait. There's a saying, and I say this to conclude. Don't wait for somebody to tell you who you are. Know who you are before somebody to tell you. Because it might be too late.
Well, I feel like everywhere I go, if I'm in New York, I'm in LA, I don't care what floor we're on, what executive office, what company, everywhere I go, there's somebody rolls up to me and say, hey, I'm from Oakland, I'm from the Bay. And it's this thing that's out there, it's called business, Bay Love, whatever you want. And I say that to tell all the creative minds in the room, all the aspiring creative minds that all over this industry, business, whatever you want, people from the Bay are there in numbers. Like, there's a lot of success stories out of the Bay. And I just want to talk to the creative minds. I'm actually, my whole thing about the whole crack and after crack is a big deal with me. So I've just been reading this book that I just recently finished. I read it for the second time. Actually, my mother gave it to me when I was a kid, but I went back and read it again. It's called Man, Child, and the Promised Land. Yeah. And it tells a story about Harlem, 40s, 50s Harlem. And in the story, it tells you the impact of heroin when it first hit the community of Harlem, and what heroin did to Harlem is a lot similar to what crack did to Oakland. And at that time, there was a new music form that's called jazz. And what I'm getting out of, just different books I read, especially that book, it's like, these jazz guys in the early days, they smoked weed and they shot heroin, and a lot of people looked at these black cats making this new music as the bad guys. But we know the long version of the jazz story. The people who became jazz legends became heroes, and they're on posters and pictures all throughout our community. But they could have easily been hip hop story, and jazz musicians shoot all the heroin and become the bad guys and demonized, and and we could have been looking back on jazz kind of like we look at rap now, like something that poisoned the community instead of uplifting it. So I just feel like as young creative minds, if you go back and just do a little bit of research and read a little bit about history, about maybe music or about your people or whatever, you might start kind of being able to put your own picture together of what you want to do. I feel like the music is very influential to the community. The music that I made, the music that so many people made in hip hop, no matter what the subject was, has been very influential. If you want to knock down the misogynist rap and say it's accountable for these amount of assaults or whatever, do the numbers, but at the same time, realize that there ain't no new way that you could say, suck my thing or F the B, or we've said it, we've done it as a creative mind, coming from a place like the Bay Area, coming from Oakland, California, expecting to do something. You don't have to be 2 Chainz and say, I grew up on Too Short, and then you turn around and rap the same thing Too Short rapped about. Use your creative mind and make some music, represent the Bay in a new way. I get these kids in the studio every day, and I don't tell anybody what to write, but if I see somebody writing the same old thing, you might make a lot of money if you made a record tomorrow called Shake That Booty Girl, but you might not leave out this room satisfied with what you want to do in life. So I'm thinking that we're at a point now where we got enough creative minds, enough creativity in our area alone to where we could make a difference with our voices. So, just as a up-and-coming aspiring songwriter, poet, recording artist, people from the Bay are deeply into the film industry, television. If you go down to LA right now, go on any set, any video, any movie, and say, who's from the Bay? You're going to get hands raised. So it's like, aspire for, positive things. It's like, you don't have to necessarily follow in my footsteps as to come up and say, well, I want to rap just like Too Short about what he rectified. You might just want to, take this hip-hop thing and help it get to the status that jazz reached 50 years after its invention. And just for food for thought, I'm proud of hip-hop because I think that, in my opinion, you can say I might be wrong, but I think that after black people were brought to America, that we invented gospel, we invented the blues, we invented rhythm and blues, we invented jazz, we invented rock and roll, we invented hip-hop, and I don't think you can find any other person on planet Earth that has given that much culture to the entire Earth. So I feel like right here in Oakland, we got a great future if we just take this out of this room and do something with it.
So I want to give a little close as well. I said a few things earlier that I just want to lift up again. There's always three things that I say whenever I speak, and the first one is to think critically. There is an opportunity here for us to take a look at, do we have common sense deficiency syndrome? And you can tell by what's in your iPod. If you are listening to something that disrespects you and you plan that over and over again in your mind, then how does that impact your life? Right? So we have to think critically, not just about music, because as David said, it's not just hip-hop. If you have to think critically about the beauty industry and how it's teaching you that you're ugly, you have to think critically about what you're learning in school and whether it's acculturating you to disrespect yourself. You have to think critically about your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You have to think critically in every situation. It will save your life. The second thing is expanding your horizons, and I love that, Short's call to action really is about, educating yourself. And so with Mr. Belafonte, so many people have said, you have to push yourself. And that doesn't mean just you young people have to push yourself, we have to push ourselves. Right, so that's what this part of this conversation was about, is that, Short acknowledged that he had an experience where he got an education. And I'm going to challenge you to continue that education. I'm going to challenge all of us to continue our education. We close our ears sometimes to hip-hop. I love hip-hop. I consider myself an integral part of the hip-hop generation. I refuse to let it be claimed or owned by a corporate culture. This is my music too. And so we have to think critically, expand our horizons, and finally, I always say, vote with your dollar. Because it is what you support that we see more of. And one little more thing. A lot of people who know me thought it was surprising that I would have this conversation. If you talked to me 5 or 10 years ago, there was a lot of anger. I consider myself a feminist, and I've moved with fire in the belly around issues of disrespect to the sisters in my community, and I feel very passionately and strongly about that. But a sister friend of mine gave me this bracelet that says, "Be loved" on it. And that's a radical act. The brother talked earlier about forgiveness. We have to have a radical action because we need, more than anything else in our community, we need healing. And love is the most healing power in the universe. So that's my call to action.
Thank you very much. Thank you, audience. And now with that, I'd like to give the mic to Carol Russell for final words.
Before we close, I'd like to thank the mayor, Mayor Kwan. And I wanted to thank you because you started this idea. Many years ago, when you were city council, every October, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, you did not wait until October. You always encouraged domestic violence awareness. You started this town hall sessions with domestic violence every October. And I took that idea, and as domestic violence has become more common, teen dating violence was legislated last year as February for a national month. But we should not wait for February to create awareness around this issue. So I want to thank the mayor for giving us this idea.
This October we didn't do it because we were a little preoccupied. But thanks for doing it because we're talking, we did, and I just wanted to say one thing. People ask me early on, and say, hey, I really actually wanted to listen. This year, the murders on the streets are down, but the totals don't show us because in the first 2 months, we had 7 homicides that related to domestic violence. And if those were, last year we had 3 in the entire year. So we had a son who beat his mother to death in the Oakland Hills, wealthy family. We had another son who killed both his parents in sort of the middle class area of Oakland. And we've had 4, I call them homicides and not murders because it looks like the DA is actually going to call one a justifiable self-defense. And we've had 4 other homicides of heterogeneous couples, I'll call them partners, where one of the partners was killed. And so there's something happening in the community this year, and I think we all have to reach out. So we were just going to go ahead and do the October Bulletin now, to reach out and ask people to tell people about your program, about the family justice system, about where people can get help, and particularly those of us who have been doing this for a long time know that when you strike a child, you start the cycle again. And so we've been, if you know that I've been working the 100 blocks, we worked really hard to take the Harlem Kid Zone program to teach parents not to whoop their kids, not to keep that cycle going, learn the difference between disciplining a child and beating a child. And we have to break the cycle. It is so ugly that when the domestic violence kinds of almost equal our street murders, we know that there's something happening in our families and we need to sort of, I think, reach out to each other. So thanks, Carolyn.